Welcome to the Diversity Pivot Podcast. I'm your host, Julie Kratz. This season, we're having sweaty conversations for change. We're talking with guests about uncomfortable conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion needed to pivot towards positive change. We do this podcast because it's important that all voices are heard, all people are seen, and all people feel a sense of belonging in their workplaces. Let's meet this week's guest. Welcome back to the Next Pivot Point podcast. We are thrilled as always to be with an esteemed guest and expert on diversity and inclusion. And today we have Patty Beach. She is founder of LeadershipSmarts, an inclusive leadership evangelist that combines leadership best practices and coaching to transform managers into the best boss ever and executives into inspirational role models that can scale and grow a company. She is also the author of The Art of Alignment, a practical guide for inclusive leadership, and the Versatility Factor Profile, an assessment for gender intelligent and inclusive leadership. Patty, welcome to the show.
Great. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks, Julie.
Yeah, same. Well, we're going to dig into that assessment. That sounds really intriguing, and versatility, which I don't think we talk as much about with inclusive leadership. So it's going to be a fun conversation for sure. But this season, we're trying to start off with what we're calling some sweaty, candid conversations. And I'm sure doing the work you do, you probably have a treasure trove of these stories. But I'm curious if you could break the ice, get our listeners to know you through a story when maybe things went well, didn't go so well with diversity and how it all worked out.
Well, I've been working in the field of diversity and inclusion for a very long time. I started one of the first employee resource groups for women in the energy industry back in the 80s. So it's a really long time ago. At the time, I was one of, as a female geologist working in the energy industry, oftentimes I was one of 40 guys. And so I really had an interest in trying to help women survive and thrive in that energy industry. And so I have a lot of stories from back then that I think are kind of interesting. I know right now it may not be quite as pertinent, but
it's probably not much better though. That energy industry and many industries still woefully
energy
male-dominated.
Industry. So one of the stories that I think is kind of interesting is, and really in a way quite sad, but at the time our company had decided that they wanted to invite several women that had been kind of shakers and movers in the company, maybe senior women, or also women like myself who'd done things to support other women by creating a women's resource group to a conference that was it was hosted by Catalyst, and they had tables, and they actually flew us in the corporate jet with the CEO up to this event. And what was really interesting about it, this was like in 1998 or something like that, was that they kind of sat me next to the CEO, and the HR guys, was sort of encouraging him to talk to some of the ladies on the plane, which pretty much he had his nose in the newspaper the whole time. And all of us were having a great time because we're like going to Chicago, we're flying into this thing. And one of the things that I remember was that I had asked him, well, what do you think about, the company that has won this Catalyst Award for supporting women in business? And he said, oh, that's just fake what they're doing. Like, I don't even think that it really matters. And so you could just see all of these women in the plane, like their whole jaws just dropping, that he's being frank about the fact that he just had been kind of brought along on this boondoggle and not really bought into this whole thing. Right. So then when I went back to my company, and everybody was like, oh my God, you got to go on the CEO plane. What do you think? And I was like, I didn't even know what to say. Just it was so disillusioning to think that they'd made such an effort to do this, but there was that one person on the plane who just, he was the most important person who didn't buy into it at all. It was quite a shocker. So anyway, it's nice to reveal a story here on your podcast because we're going to hold it since 1999. It's one of those
and I would wonder, listeners, is that something that you think could still happen today? I mean, that was over 20 years ago, but I had an experience very similar to that from a white male CEO 10 years ago that I was in, like you, in complete disbelief. I mean, here you think inclusion's the right thing to do. Everyone's on this journey together. And I remember him looking at me and saying, we don't promote women in the childbearing years. And I was like, what the heck was that all about? Like, we weren't even talking about that. We were just talking about career development, and that came in, and I'm like, oh, yikes. But I think there's a difference between unconscious bias and maybe conscious
I
bias.
don't know how he could have been unconscious at that point. He'd already been through the whole catalyst presentation. This was on the way home, that he's saying
Didn't
this
get the
stuff aloud.
message.
And what was interesting was there were about 4 of those women that were senior that within a year left the company because they'd been on a plane that day. When it would have been like the best day. There we were all, pumped up, having this amazing experience, this whole, thing to pump us up to be like powered women in the company. And just that one comment, how much that deflated our balloon. I still can't even believe it, and I mean,
What a
hopefully
loss.
some of those, like, I don't even know what to call them, these people that just don't get it and won't get it, no matter how much you talk to them about it, no matter how much you surround them with enthusiasm, etc. It's not been my experience in general. Most of the time I find that when you expose people to these ideas, they're all about it. Like most people are social animals that want to get along with each other and support each other. And, if they discover that they're doing something that's, disadvantage to another person, they're generally happy to step it up. But that was just a big shocker. So every once in a while, I think in a way it was a lesson to myself that there are a few people out there that hold on to power and will not let it go no matter what. And, and I don't want to bum out your listeners, because let's find them and get rid of them. Whatever it is we have to do. I will tell you, that is not the experience with the CEOs I work with. I work with some fabulous CEOs who are all about, the men and the women and people of every gender identity in their company. I mean, they are so on fire. Like I have one CEO that he says, let's not talk about DEI. Let's talk about IDEA. I said, well, what's IDEA? And he says, it's inclusion, diversity, equity, and action. So he's all about creating, action around diversity and inclusion in his organization, and they are on fire. It's just it's been an amazing thing to see how when you have a leader who gets it, how they light up everybody like a rocket. And when you have a leader who doesn't get it, how it dampens the enthusiasm, it just holds down. Yep. I got all this trouble to hire women, hire people of color, but not really include them, not really care that they, that is just to me like, why? But
I love that acronym. And the action piece is often missing.
Oh, I'm all about that. Insights into action. Forget about talking about it.
And some of that is talking about it on the podcast and training and things like that.
Yeah. We can talk. We could be mad about this all the day long, but have you done anything about it? Right. I feel like I have. I've been blazing a trail in a way. Maybe that CEO lit the fire under my butt. You know what I mean? Because I was like, oh, I'm not putting up with this now.
I know. Anyway. Well, I'm curious, Patty, with the work you do, tell us more. I think you mentioned that you've got, kind of tools and frameworks that you help take away the complexity of these pretty complex topics, right? Diversity and inclusion, it's so nuanced and there's so much to it. Like, for example, empathy. We talk a lot about the need to be empathetic as an ally, right? Not being sympathetic, not being like, woe is you, I'm so sorry, and feel bad for somebody, but really try to understand their perspective. I'm curious, Patty, what tools, what information is helping you set the tone for these conversations nowadays?
Well, I created a tool for this, and actually it kind of got downloaded to me, like I was working on my book, The Art of Alignment, and I wanted to come up with 3 principles of alignment. And I had about 5 that were, bantering about like, which one do I choose? And I like to keep things really simple. It's like, let's just bring 3 tools, not like 5 tools to the table. So one morning I woke up and I just got this like acronym downloaded to me. And the acronym was Shuba. And it's one of the principles in my book for alignment, the Shuba Principle. And what the Shuba is it's an acronym that stands for see, hear, understand, value, and appreciate. And so I'm going to break that down, even though it's super simple, like everybody can get it, but, see. So first of all, oftentimes people that are not in the majority are not seen. They're just not in the room because there's not enough of them. We haven't hired enough of them. So we don't have them in the room to get their opinion on the table. And then here, do they feel safe to express themselves? Do they get a turn at the table to express themselves so that all the players in the meeting are being heard? And then we have understood. Do we listen underneath what they're saying for what they really mean? Where they're coming from the heart. And then valued would mean that I, as a leader, suspend my judgment enough to let that person's ideas inform my judgment. so that together we move from my idea to our idea kind of place. And then the
I
last
love
is
that.
appreciated, really sharing with the person that I'm thankful that they brought their voice to the table, even if I don't agree with them, so that then they feel comfortable, they feel the psychological safety to bring their voice to the table in the future.
Yeah. And so much of that is about like psychological safety and giving people, everyone wants to feel seen and heard and feel that sense of belonging and safety. But oftentimes, like you said, if you don't see yourself reflected in the organization, there's not enough people like you in a typical meeting setting or,
Right.
in leadership, especially. It's like, whew, is it safe for me to really bring my full self to work? Or do I need to do I need to um, code switch and kind of play by the rules that are dictated usually by white men and organizations? Just
Right.
curious about that, Patty. Like, how do you see people code switching and covering that are different? And how can we help people so they don't have to do that?
Well, I think that one of the main things is they keep themselves safe by not really saying what they think. They just hold their ideas inside, or they talk about what they really feel outside of the meeting. They don't bring their full self to the game, so to speak. And that's why I created my 3 principles, 4 steps, and 5 C's of alignment, because it creates a little process, like a roadmap that leaders and teams can walk through for decisions that they want to make inclusively. So it can be used one to one, like a leader with their direct report, or it could be used in a team for a team decision. But basically, these 3 principles, 4 steps, and 5 C's walk people through a place where they can go from divergent thinking. So this is one of the problems with, diversity is the problems and the wonderful things about it is that you get divergent thinking, but sometimes it's hard then to come to a solution that we need within a time frame, because most businesses, they still have, I don't know, features to put in their software or launch dates, all kinds of things that they have to hit, their budgets, et cetera. So they need alignment, even though they have all that diversity. So these 3 principles, 4 steps, and 5 C's just help them get there faster. And when you practice them, what you find is that there's a space for everyone to talk about what they like about something. And that creates psychological safety, their concerns, and then any suggested changes. And it's just the way that you talk about it, it just allows for everyone to feel comfortable bringing up their doubts and reservations so that it can be heard. Now, what I still believe is that the leader should have some authority to be able to make that decision, but to do it from an informed place, because it's actually heard everyone out, not like a place where, okay, I see and I hear you, but I don't really understand, value, and appreciate you. That last part of that Shuba principle makes a huge difference. Otherwise, it's like, yeah, I see you, I hear you. It's really not. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking to really be included in solutions.
Yeah, yeah. It's that whole diverse representation isn't enough. It's the inclusion and belonging factor that you have to have, and that's through real action.
Yeah, creating an environment, right, that gives people the opportunity to speak their minds, feel safe doing it, and actually enjoy doing it. So it's not
Hmm.
difficult. You don't feel any punitive or repercussions, or there's always politics in companies because there's everybody's reputation and their paychecks at stake, et cetera. But when you create the right environment, man, a lot of that just goes away and people are easily co-creative.
And the importance of that senior leadership that you talked about earlier. I find in my work, unless senior leadership is really actively engaged in this work, it just doesn't work because people focus on the work that needs to be done. And this becomes a nice to have, not a must have for diversity and inclusion. Patty, I'm curious. You talk about the versatility factor with inclusive leadership. And I know you have an assessment that does this. Can you unpack that for listeners? Let us know how that works.
Right. So what I believe is that the best leaders have a balance of masculine and feminine energy. And they understand that masculine and feminine energy are equal and opposite and equally valid forms of energy. So on the masculine side would be things like, logic, facts, data, information, structure, goal setting, et cetera. And on the feminine side, it would be nurturing, diplomacy, things like emerging ideas and creating more space for things to happen organically, accepting that people are human and they need a break every once in a while. And so with great leadership, we see that balance of the masculine and feminine energy, that they know when to kind of push and challenge a person. And they know when to lay back and support the person. And so I created this online profile that measures a leader's balance of masculine and feminine energy. It doesn't tell you whether you're more masculine or more feminine. It tells you, the degree to which you are both. How strongly are you masculine and feminine? A lot of profiles would show you're masculine or you're feminine, which is really just a little bit too binary, I guess. But anyway, the point of it being that once you see this profile, you can see the degree to which those pairs of values show up in your self-association with them. And it's kind of an interesting profile because what I've seen is that for women over a long period of time, we've been talking about masculine and feminine energy because going into the male workforce, we've been expected to show up and kind of man up and, put our big girl pants on and all that stuff. But for men, not so much. They haven't been challenged in the workforce to really consider that their feminine energy would be valuable. And for some women who have been challenged to man up for a long time, they also don't know that their feminine energy is valuable at work. So it's a really great profile because it kind of helps elucidate some of those unconscious biases and what I feel is just sort of a unconscious cultural misogyny about not bringing feminine to the workplace. And what we're seeing right now with the millennial generation is they're more comfortable with that balance. And so they really want it. They want that workplace that has, the best of both worlds, whereas it's more in the, sort of senior leader group where some of that old school thinking is sort of stuck. But anyway, that profile is useful to get people to examine their own thoughts about themselves. And I have to give you an example of where I thought was pretty interesting was I had hired this very talented Eagle Scout engineer guy come to work for me as an intern. And he was marvelous, like the sweetest, nicest guy. He just had it all in every way. So he took the profile and he brings it back to me and he says, Patty, I'm kind of surprised with this profile. Look, shows that I don't have very strong feminine qualities. And I was like, well, I'm kind of surprised by that too, because it seems like you have them. Do you think you have them? And he goes, yeah, I think I have them. And I was like, well, then why didn't you self-associate with those words? Like you didn't put a high value on those words. What's up there? And he walked off thinking, told me he really felt like he had been holding them down, but he didn't feel like he was allowed to have them, just sort of stuck in the man box. And that man box that a lot of men are in is a box that men and women put them in, this don't cry, don't be too emotional, don't bring your feelings to work, etc. But in the end, when people do that, you just end up with an inhuman workforce. You need both the masculine and feminine skills in order to have that feeling of the warmth, the humanity, the kind of leadership that's flexible. So I ended up coining this term versatility to describe this because the word versa in Latin means to turn. And so when you're versatile as a leader, you turn from the masculine to the feminine according to what's needed in the moment in time. So this profile and the classes that we teach, and versatility is actually another one of those 3 principles of alignment. The Shuba Principle is one, Versatility Principle is another, but they're very helpful to create the context for this full spectrum leadership where all people can come in and thrive. So a lot of times to take that versatility factor profile, I use it with leaders and take a look at their balance and why do they feel like they have the balance or they don't. And a lot of times what we see is over time, they start migrating more towards being comfortable on both sides.
Yeah. It reminds me, you were talking about Gen Z and the younger generations being pretty accepting about gender fluidity, and it is a spectrum rather than binary. And I remember this experience I had at a backyard barbecue like 5 years ago with a teenager in the neighborhood. And I was talking about the work I do, similar to the work you do. And he's like, what? Like, it just was like totally not on his radar. And he's like, gender is such a social construct. And I remember being like, what? I had to like really process it afterwards.
Yeah.
But it goes to show you like a lot of these gendered behaviors are socialized. I mean, we don't come out of the womb as women wanting to please others or men wanting to man up and take risks. These are things that we learn over time, just like the person you said that took that assessment, his self-assessed based on what he should be doing as a self-identified man versus how he really was. And that's so limiting to everyone, all genders. When you try to force them into boxes, we all lose out.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting because I came up with this versatility factor, assessment that shows the balance, masculine and feminine energy, with the idea of all of us can have whatever blend of energy we want. Right. And as soon as it comes out, just using the word masculine and feminine is just not allowed anymore, because they're just like, that's a construct and that's too binary, et cetera. But meanwhile, what I'm really trying to do is just help people understand the overlay between our feelings about this polarity. And you can call it masculine, feminine, you can call it yin, yang, you can call it whatever you want. And what are we really allowing ourselves to have in that? Because when you look at it, it's the whole, basically. It's like if you had darkness without light or whatever, there's these opposite energies. And so it's really helpful to understand these opposite energies and how they play. And some of it's constructed, some of it may be biological, I don't know. But in the end, I think that what we need now for this time is a blend of both.
Yep.
And I think that part of the reason why we're getting a blended both at work is because women have pushed into the workplace, and then doing that, right, they've kind of pushed into their masculine energy.
You just described my 12 years in corporate America was
Yeah.
pretending to be a different version of me, because I was, generally speaking, the only woman in the room in very male dominated industries. And I didn't even know like how taxing and exhausting that was until you I remember the first day being out of it, like, I can be myself again. And
I don't know if you know this, but like 50% of women who go into STEM professions quit their job after 40 and never go back, even if they have their PhD and love the science that they do.
Yeah.
And it doesn't I believe that all professions, whether it's, male dominated professions that are lacking women or women dominated professions that are lacking men, that they're better when there's a gender blend. And there's lots of data that shows that, know. So anyway.
Yep. We've referred to that several times on the podcast. McKinsey Women in the Workplace report. It just came out for 2021. The great stats that support that. It's like a 21% profitability boost when you have blended gendered teams. And what I want to go back to, Patty, is like the benefits for all of us, because I think so much we get into this zero-sum game. I win, you lose mentality. And I think what you're saying with this blended leadership and being versatile and having all genders represented, we all do better. What do you think the benefits are? I mean, especially for allies that are listening to this might be like, like what's in it for me?
I think that I always like to say, I mean, this is kind of dumb, but maybe not, that you can choose to have $1 or $2. Most people would choose $2. Absolutely. I don't know anybody who wouldn't. And if you think of masculine and feminine energy as these equal and opposite, equally valuable energies, why would you just choose one when you can have both? They're literally out there for everyone to have.
That's such a great metaphor. Right? I like that. Yeah, it's like, duh.
And it's like having $2. I mean, it's just being twice as rich, or it's like, having the whole environment. And this is why I feel like what I see with versatile leaders that understand how to blend masculine and feminine energy, is that everybody's comfortable in the meeting, and we end up with solutions that we not only think are the right because we have facts and data, but we feel they're right because we allow for people's emotions to be factored into that equation. And I cannot tell you how many times I've seen the worst decisions being made when it looked good on paper, but nobody was saying how they really didn't like it. And then they go out and execute it, forget about it. So when I look at alignment as being something where people come together and they're on board and they're excited, because they brought all of their ideas and their reservations. Now we can move the bad ideas off the table and put the good ideas on the table. I mean, who doesn't want that? That's what we're all looking for. And most businesses honestly cannot afford to waste the time.
Yeah.
If you ever work with like startup leaders, or, they get their money and they need to make things happen quickly,
it's so
they're
freeing.
wasting a lot of time if they don't have that full blend.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. It reminds me of a quick story before we wrap up, Patty. I had a friend that's in the leadership space as well that went dog sledding a few years ago. And, her being curious about gender and things like that in leadership, she asked like, what are the, sexes of the dogs? Cause they can't identify their gender or communicate that anyway. And they said, oh yeah, we have male and female side by side. Down the line of the dogs leading the sled. And she said, well, why is that? And she said, exactly what you're saying is, oh, we would never have just males or just females. They're much better when they're together. They very much operate and make the whole team better because they play off of each other's strengths. And I was like, isn't that, if it works with dogs, it's obviously a primal thing.
Yeah, and
Um,
there's a reason why there's half women and men on the planet.
yeah.
I mean, I think that somehow we survived as a species this way. What do you think was going on there? In that divine design, if you believe in that kind of thing. But I want
Yeah.
to go. Because I'm a geologist. That was my previous career. I had a 15-year career in that. I really look at the Earth over a long swath. And I really do feel that we need to just pay a little allegiance to our ancestors that got us to this point. So I like to call our Paleolithic ancestors Trina and Trog. If you can imagine that they're like the grandparents, great, 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 great grandparents of us, right? And there was a lot of things that Trina and Trog had to do because they could not control the size of their family. For example, oftentimes they would have children from the time that Trina came into menses until, she had her menopause, right? So that she might have babies every 3 years because she would be nursing. And so Trog had to go out away from this cloistered place where all the kids, where Trina was kind of taking care of them because she would have a baby and be nursing a baby and a toddler, and all that kind of stuff, and bring back enough food, not only for her, but for him, plus all the people that were out in the field with just like a spear and a rock. I mean, it was kind of insane what they had to do. And so they lived in very different ways for millions of years. Trog, taking the younger guys out in the field, had to make sure that they didn't, that they got away from their hunted grounds and came back in time to be safe. And so they might order those younger ones around, the stronger boys, so that it was more efficient. They could make time hay. And meanwhile, Trina would come and distribute those resources amongst all of those people. Well, all of those strengths that they both had, we all have inside of us now. What we don't have that they have is we don't have those constraints. Now, men and women don't need to be strong because we have machines and technology to carry things and lift things. You can lift a car with a button now. And then we also don't have to have so many kids to take care of. So men and women have leisure time, or we can go to work. We can be more flexible. So I can guarantee you there were probably Trinas who wanted to go out and hunt and do all that, but they just couldn't. They didn't have that. And then there were Trogs who probably wanted to stay by the fire and cook and mix things in bowls and stuff like that. But those gifts and talents that we had that had us survive, we still have them. Men and women have them. There's lots of, and so we just need to be more flexible with ourselves now, allow ourselves to enter into this glorious freedom that we have.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really interesting to look back in history and gender roles, because as you're mentioning, especially agriculture really forced women to produce more workers to support the farm. And because men had superior upper body strength, a lot of times were out in the field. And so women's job became, purely childbearing and raising for production, for necessity. And that changed. I mean, that's only within our last 10% beyond the planet.
It's
Of our
actually
history.
been only in the last 60 years since we've had birth control that
Right.
women have had this opportunity, right, to decide they only want to have 2 or 3 kids.
Yep.
Up until that point, there was just no other choice. It was cold, and that's where we came from. So we need to appreciate that there were millions of years of that codified into our biology, how we worked, whatever we did. But then there are also now these 60 years has created all this freedom, and it's a lot of confusion, honestly. But meanwhile, the good news is we all have it all. We just got to tap into it for when we need it or want it. And there may be some people who prefer something more traditional. I don't fault them for that. It's a nice arrangement if you like that. I'm an epicure. I love everything.
Same. And if I were to take your versatility factor profile, I'm sure I would have a very big blend of both masculine and feminine energies. Yeah. And I love just giving people a license to be their full selves, and recognizing gender as a construct that can really confine us all. Patty, this has been so good. Tell our listeners, if you had to pick one key takeaway from our conversation, or one tip you haven't shared that you always like to share in your talks, one thing that our listeners can take away from today.
I would like to just encourage everyone to double down on Shuba. Even just today, if you just find someone and give them as much Shuba as you can, you will find that relationship shifted. Yeah. And it's actually a miracle. You will find them lit up, and you'll actually light yourself up by finding the best in them.
I love that.
That's
Yeah,
what
it's
I
a
would
two-way. A lot of times
encourage.
as allies, showing our humanity and listening to others, we get better through
Yeah.
those activities.
Double
Awesome.
down on Shuba.
Will do. Well, we'll link to that all in the show notes. Patty, tell our listeners, where can they find you? Where can they connect with you and follow your work?
Yeah, they can go to LeadershipSmarts.com. And there we have some free webinars where they can learn about alignments. And we also have a download of the first chapter of my book. So LeadershipSmarts.com is the best one-stop shop for everything about alignment.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for making the time today, and we appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us.
Hey, Julie, I want to finish too by telling you how much I appreciate all the work you've done. I've been following what you've been doing, and it's just a delight to see the courage that you have and how you move this important work forward.
I appreciate that. That means so much to me. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for listening to the Diversity Pivot podcast. Allies are necessary for positive change. If you're on the journey to becoming an ally, we invite you to participate in our new signature Lead Like an Ally online self-paced learning program. It's comprehensive, and it includes an online learning platform packed with tools, stories, and ideas to become an even better ally. Head over to leadlikeanally.com to learn more.